Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Macomb Township Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Today is December the 5th. The time is 7 o'clock, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. The first item on the agenda this evening is the roll call. Madam Secretary, could you call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Starting with Member Piper.
Here.
Member DeCoster.
Here.
Member Posey.
Here.
Chairman Tuckfield.
Here.
And Secretary Slauson present.
Very good, Ms. Slauson. With that, we're going to move on to item 2, which would be the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could rise for me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. With that, we're going to move on to item 3, which is the approval of agenda items with any corrections. Is there any motions on this item?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Motion by Ms. Posey to approve tonight's agenda.
Support.
Support by Ms. Slauson. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. That item carries. Next item is the approval of the minutes for our previous meeting. This would be those for October the 3rd, 2019. Are there any corrections, additions, or motions?
Hearing none, I'll make a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes.
Support.
Motion by Ms. Posey, supported by Ms. Slauson. Just to clarify, Ms. Posey, is that as read?
As presented, correct.
Very good, thank you. Motion to approve by Slauson, supported by, motion by Posey, supported by Slauson, excuse me. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. That motion carries. This brings us to our own agenda item this evening. This is a variance request from the zoning ordinance, section 10.0344. This is with regard to requesting a wall that does not have a continuous poured concrete foundation. This is for permanent parcel 08224000223. And the petitioner is EIG 14T KCE2 MI Macomb-LLC. With that, typically we have been having the planner introduce the item. Mr. Maher is not here this evening, and so I'm going to briefly read the planner's recommendation, which we have in our packet, but I'm going to note for the record. The planner indicates in his correspondence to us, a wall with continuous foundation on the property line appears to violate the terms of the easement for consumers' energy. It would seem that this would provide a means to justify a practical difficulty to justify a variance. We've had a great deal of trouble with shifting pillars and falling panels with the hung panel system over the past years. If the ZBA finds that a practical difficulty exists, we would highly recommend the wall to be replaced with an industrial rated vinyl fence. This would also be more in character with the residential character in the area. With that, that is the recommendation from the planner, and I'm going to open it up to the petitioner if they could come forward, state their name and address for the record, and comment on the request, anything they would like to bring up about it.
Good evening, John Shatursky with 814 Development, 3221 West Big Beaver Road, Suite 111, Troy, Michigan 48084. And as you had stated with our petition, we're requesting a variance from the continuous foundation for a hung panel type with channel pillar masonry wall due to consumers not permitting us to do the continuous foundation in the easement.
Very good. Do any of the members have questions for the petitioner?
I do, Mr. Chairman. So a couple months ago you were here.
Yes.
Weren't there a couple other variances that you were requiring at that point?
We had been looking for, and there was one was the parking variance which we withdrew working through the bank parking agreement with engineering. And then the other two related around the wall and landscaping. There's two portions. One requires a wall or landscaping around the parking. One requires the wall and landscaping for the daycare use. As a result of that easement being where it is, we're not able to place the landscaping within 12 feet of that north property line. And what we've done is just south of the easement to the north of the playground area, we've done a solid landscaping row for additional screening there. At the time, we were looking for a vinyl fence variance in lieu of the masonry wall because of the foundation issue. And our discussion was to look into the hung panel type with the channeled piers. And so that's what we've come back to do. We submitted for the special land use approval, and in the review, it came back that a continuous foundation is required.
Okay. So approving a fence today, you've made the landscaping adjustments on the north side.
Yes.
And another variance will not be required.
Correct.
Okay.
Good, is there any other questions for the petitioner? Hearing one, I do have a question, and this might be directed to Mr. Assorti. My apologies, I didn't usually try to get these questions in earlier, and I haven't. I just want to verify, if you're familiar, it looks like there's two different portions that they're requesting here, which I believe are different ordinances. One is with regards to continuous footing, and the other one is to the hung wall panel. The ordinance cited, I believe, is only the continuous footing one. Is that, do you know if that's accurate?
No, they're requesting it's 10.0344, right?
Which is wall construction. I think that's,
Right.
so there's two, there would be two, I'm just trying to make sure I understand it, because part of that portion is that we don't allow the hung wall panel, so it would be a variance for both the continuous footing and the type of fencing that they're requiring. Just want to make sure I understand the.
In actuality, if I may, Chairman, in actuality, Tom, they are requesting two variances, but they did it under one. So if they were to go with, if we were to approve and go with the hung panels, it would allow then for a non-continuous foundation on the property line for the wall.
Oh, okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So,
I guess theoretically, if there's different portions of that ordinance that you could separate out, and the board was so inclined after discussion with the applicant, if the applicant wanted to make clear that it's based on two parts, and the board felt that you could grant in part a limited variance in that regard by breaking up sections of the ordinance, you could do that. Does that answer your question?
can I jump in a little bit more?
Go ahead.
So in the variance, Tom, it says that the planning commission shall determine the type of masonry wall to be constructed at the public hearing pursuant to section 10.2402. So my belief on the ZBA would be for us to allow a non-continuous foundation for the type of wall that goes there.
Okay.
But it would, in my opinion, I believe the type would go to the planning commission when they turn in their site plans to be determined. Is that correct?
They determine the type of the masonry wall, right? And it still says, though, you would have to grant a variance if you're going to permit hung-type walls, then the zoning board would have to approve that.
The hung type as well?
Yeah, because it's
It's specifically
specifically,
stated in
it's specifically stated in the ordinance that those are not permitted.
Correct. Okay, that's what I wanted to make, I just wanted to know if we could just approve whether or not it's a continuous foundation, but we would have to do both. We would have to approve that, and along with that, the potential of getting the hung walls.
You could, but then they still wouldn't have a variance to allow a hung-type wall, because that's, and the planning commission doesn't have the authority
To do that,
to
okay.
do that.
That's what I just want to make sure we're clear on.
Okay, and then to the petitioner, I guess to follow that up, I think you brought back the hung type walls based on some, and I think you mentioned this in your initial portion, based on some of the comments from the last meeting. Is that accurate?
That is
Or
accurate,
I should
yes.
say, that's why you're looking at that specific type, not,
That is correct, yes.
very good.
And so in that ordinance, if I may, too, it talks about either being constructed of brick, stone textured, poured concrete, or brick embossed poured concrete. And that's what we would be looking to do along with the channeled. So they would be removable sections. There'd be an embossed or poured concrete slab that would sit in between these posts and then be movable or removable.
Very good. Any other questions from the board?
One more. Well, I have a little concern. After speaking with our engineer and asked what his feelings were, and maybe, Mr. Jakosker, if you have any experience with these hung-type walls, he had indicated that they have trouble with shifting. We have where it was approved at Hall Road and Romeo Plank, and truck hit the wall. It's crumbled, it's deteriorated since. The maintenance is more difficult. So our engineer and our planners are not suggesting that type of wall be put in that area for those reasons. Does anybody else have any opinion or discussion with regards to that type of wall?
So I think I'm the one that probably suggested it a couple meetings ago. I've used it 3 or 4 times, and I've never had an issue with it. We had a vehicle hit one, you lift out the panels, you put them back in. Could be different ground conditions, could be installation issues. I understand and obviously respect their recommendation as well, so I'll take that into account. But yeah, in my use of them, I've never had an issue.
Who would be responsible for repairing it if a vehicle should hit it and damage it?
Landowner.
Okay. Probably the same as if it was a vinyl fence. They would be responsible for that as well.
Yeah, and the vinyl fence is going to be very similar, where you're going to dig a small foundation or a footing, put a post in the ground. So if there would be shifting, I guess it may shift more with a heavier, may move a little more. I don't know if vinyl's a little more forgiving. But like I said, I haven't had an issue with them. I guess if they're installed correctly, they are easily fixed, but that's my history with them.
Also, I'd like to note, and I know you're going to open it up to the public after this, but just so that if I recall correctly, I believe those of you that lived in that area preferred a masonry wall over a vinyl fence wall, or a vinyl fence? Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I will open it to the public. If anyone in the public would like to speak on this request, please come up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, and give any comments you might have.
Jim and Marcy Glufke, 21707, 22 Mile Road. I don't know, at this point, I guess I give up. The last meeting, you directed a comment to him saying that if the variances were granted, this whole thing would be squashed. And here we are again tonight. So what changed in the plans?
They came
I
back
think you tried to sway the board last meeting, to be honest, by asking that question. And thank goodness a couple of them went with our side.
If I remember right, I think the last variance was for a vinyl fence, wasn't it?
Correct, but Mr. Tuckfield, before anybody even voted, stated to these guys that are the developers that if the variances were turned down, that this project would not go through.
Forgive me, I mean, I think that was for the vinyl fence. I may be off here, but
This was for the whole
that was-
project because they couldn't move nothing over. This is concerning the 25-foot. That's my next question. Does this involve the 25-foot? If you grant the variance, does this include the 25-foot buffer?
Typically, we don't go back and forth in this portion, but I would say that this variance does not regard the buffer, does not have anything to do with the landscape zone. The only thing that this variance request that they're coming forth to us is whether or not they can build a wall that does not have a continuous foundation. And if that is granted, if the wall that they can put in there can be a hung panel type, which typically we do not allow in the ordinance. Those are the 2 requests that they have before us this evening.
You know what, I give up. In regards to the vehicles, there's not going to be any vehicles near this fence. I mean, the retention pond will be on my side. I believe the playground's on the other side. There's not going to be any vehicles running into the cement wall if it is granted. I don't believe the parking lot comes up to the wall. I know it doesn't on our side. So I don't think that would be an issue.
If I may.
Go ahead, I think you're about to ask the same question I was about to ask.
If a wall was to be put there, you as a resident preferred for it to be masonry over vinyl fence, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
And we
But
do,
it was brought up that the truck backed in, I mean,
it was, yeah, because they had used it as an example at 21
right.
Mile Road.
I don't think that would be, I mean, obviously, the only people that would hit would be people on our side,
Okay,
if it was hit.
okay. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, if I may, if I'm looking at this drawing properly, I think they're just looking for this along the north side, not on the west
It
end of
may
the
be,
property
but it's not the request that we have in front of us tonight. The request would be for the property,
for the whole property.
yes.
So what is going on the west side?
It's, for us, that's not the question tonight. So last meeting, we had other questions and we were looking at the side. This one, they're asking, that the ordinance states that you have to put in a wall between these two uses, and the wall has to have a continuous footing. They've stated that they're not able to do that on the north side of the property, and they're asking for relief to be able to put a different type of fence in that does not allow or does not require continuous footing. So that's the first request that they have, first part of the request. The second part of the request is if they were allowed to put in a fence that did not have a continuous footing, then what type of fence? Our ordinance specifically states that they cannot do a hung panel type fence, but that is what they're requesting to do. So that will be masonry panels in between posts with slots. So they're asking, what their request is two parts. One, can we put, instead of a continuous foundation, can we put something with other formats? And two, can we put in a wall that is hung panels? That is.
This only concerns the north side, though?
Mr. Chair, you
Yes.
need to clarify that with the applicant, because that's not the applicant in front of you. The application in front of you is to put in a continuous, a variance to section 10.0344 that requires a continuous foundation with hung panels. They have one request in.
Then I should stipulate,
Yeah.
that is, their request is to put in a hung panel fence, which is not allowed by,
Correct.
correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly. Their request has two issues with it to our ordinances it states. The first is that a hung panel fence would not be continuous foundation. And the second is that we specifically say in the ordinance that we don't allow hung panel.
Right, but my question is this for the north boundary only or the west side also?
So the way the request is made, it's not made for a specific location. It's made for the property.
So would they be required to do that all the way around then?
They would, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Assorti, but they would then be able to put that type of fence around any portion of the property that required a fence in the first place. It does not stipulate what the balance is between the two. It just says that they can put in a post one instead of a continuous foundation.
All right, I guess my question is what type of fence would go on the west side then?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr.
I'd like to address the applicant. It's
Certainly.
kind of out of order, but at the last meeting, we did discuss with you the consistency surrounding the property, that the same type of fencing would be everywhere. That's still the plan, correct?
For the sake of consistency, yes.
Right, and for aesthetics in the township as
Correct.
well. Okay.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak on this request? Hearing none, I would bring this back to the board for any questions or comments.
I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Assorti. So at the September 5th meeting, we denied the variance that when they request the vinyl fence. It appears that the solution to that isn't the hung type walls either, potentially. If we were to have to choose between the two and go by the recommendation of the planner with the vinyl fence, if it was denied, can we do that even?
I think what you need to do is clarify with the applicant, if the request is something different than, you have to look at it this way, just as if you had a zoning request for a front yard setback and a side yard setback all in one, you know, for instance, a house built closer to the corner, if the applicant is asking for both at once, and that's what the board needs to vote on, unless there's a modification to that request during the course of the hearing. Does that answer your question?
So what I'm reading is they're asking just to allow the variance to allow the hung panel concrete walls.
Oh, I understand it, that they're asking both for non-continuous foundation and hung panels.
Okay,
They're asking for both parts.
Okay.
So just like you would,
But
just
both
like a
requests,
house and
one
a,
request.
it's one request
okay,
for two, you're correct, there's two parts to it. Just like you would have one request to build a house that that exceeds the set yard, the front yard setback and the side yard all at once.
So this just might be technical, but I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that we're doing it all right. In the memo here, it just addresses the 6-foot hung panel concrete wall with the planner's recommendation on it. So it doesn't mention that other part, so that's where I'm unclear.
Seems like in the memo,
So where it says variance request, it just mentions the 6-foot high hung panel concrete wall where a 6-foot high poured concrete masonry wall and
but that
continuous
would-
foundation is
that
required.
addresses both of them, I would
Okay.
think. Because inherently, that's what that fence is,
Okay, without saying it.
correct?
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear.
That would be
It
my
might be
understanding.
best to clarify with the applicant that that's what he's asking for.
That's why I want to make sure.
Are you following what we're
Yes,
discussing?
yes, I am.
And can you give clarification?
Well, by the nature of having to go to a masonry wall with channeled pillars, it would have to be paneled. We could affix at the columns, so they're not loose, free floating. But yes, that is the nature of the request, the two-part.
I would just ask that we're very clear in the motion so that there's not any loopholes or
Right.
interpretation of what it is to be done.
Yeah, so there's one request, and that request is to construct a wall that does not have a continuous foundation and is a hung-type wall.
Okay.
And is masonry, which I believe is
Yes.
critical to it. All right, I'd only have one comment before we go, and that is that I recognize the planner's recommendations. I generally don't like getting into style of fencing. I didn't like getting into it last time particularly. But I do think that a concrete fence matches the intent of the ordinance more than the vinyl fence. I recognize the maintenance issues. But I believe the purpose of the fence in the ordinance is to block sound and light as much as possible, and I think that a masonry-type fence is going to achieve that more than a vinyl fence. That would be my only comment that I would make on it. I also feel that the neighbors might be happier with that, which I think is also a valuable thing in this particular case. So, with that, I would open up the floor to any questions, comments, or motions. And while doing that, I would make sure that you remember Mr. Assorti's comment. We should be pretty specific on this motion when we make it, so we don't leave any openings here.
So I'll make a motion if I can. Due to the practical difficulty with the consumer's energy easement on the north side of the property, my recommendation would be to allow the variance of section 10.0344 to allow for a 6-foot pre-hung masonry panel concrete wall where a 6-foot poured concrete masonry wall with a continuous foundation is required.
A motion by Mr. DeCosta on the floor. Is there any support?
Support?
Support by Ms. Lawson. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. That motion passes.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Go ahead.
do we, Tom, is it important at all that we get it in the minutes that the applicant has agreed that for consistency purposes, that it would be throughout the property, the same type of wall?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I would just like to
I
have
mean,
that
he
noted for
stated-
the record, that all the project will have the same type of fencing?
Yes.
Okay.
Would it be appropriate to put that as a condition on the variance, or would
Yes,
it?
yes.
Okay. Mr. DeCosta, would you
I apologize.
be acceptable to adding that as a condition?
Absolutely.
And Ms. Lawson, are you still okay with
Yes.
second supporting it? And would it be proper to recall? the-
Yes.
In that case, I'd like to call another vote on that issue with the amendments of requiring that same type of fencing around the perimeter of the property. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed by saying nay. The amended motion passes.
Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you, sir. All right. That takes us to item 6, which is old business. I don't believe we have any old business this morning. Now we move on to this morning, the second time today I've done that. You can tell how long the day has been. The next item would be new business. Item 7, we have no new business. Item 8 is planning consultant comments. Our planning consultant is not here today. I would just put in 2 comments here. I don't know if we have a meeting in January. I'll try to let everybody know. I usually call Becky after the meeting to see where we are. But I believe we have election of officers in January. And I also think it might be a good time, assuming we have other agenda items, to take our annual look at the bylaws. So I'm gonna ask Becky to email out a copy to everyone and put on an agenda item. We don't have to change anything, but it's probably good to just read through them and make sure there isn't anything that we want to modify. And with that, I have nothing else. Is there anything from the other board members?
Just real quick, the 9th would be the meeting if there is a January meeting, correct?
I believe so, yes.
That's the second
Yes.
Thursday, okay.
Yeah. Right, with that, I will open the floor for any motions to adjourn.
Motion to
moved.
adjourn? Support?
Motion by Ms. Posey, support by Ms. Lawson. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. That motion passes, and we are adjourned.